vamos here. Ooh, vamos here. Ooh, vamos here. What is up, everybody? My Portuguese isn't great, so I probably mispronounced that, but we're back for another breakdown video for this weekend's fantastic card. And of course, today we're going to be talking about the main event between Jamahal Hill and Glover Teixeira. If you've seen the title of this video, you'll already know I think Jamahal Hill is a very good bet this weekend, and we're going to be going into the reasons why and taking a deep dive into this matchup from a betting perspective throughout the rest of this breakdown. But this card should be fantastic. The UFC are going back to Brazil, and we know that the Brazilian fans create a lot of energy in the arena that the Brazilian fighters tend to feed off. And so this weekend, I think we're going to have an excellent event to enjoy. Don't forget, if you are betting the fights this weekend, home advantage is absolutely huge in Brazil, with Brazilian fighters winning around 65% of the time when they face non-Brazilians in UFC fights on cards that take place in Brazil. So just bear that in mind. Brazilian fighters have a big advantage this weekend. So if you do want to bet on any non-Brazilians, just make sure you either think that they can win the fight inside the distance and take the judges out of the equation, or they can win by a wide enough margin, dominate their opponent by a big enough margin to the point where the judges can't possibly screw it up. So just bear that in mind. As ever, I want to ask you guys, if you really appreciate these breakdown videos, if you get a lot of value out of them, please hit the like button below and subscribe if you haven't already. As soon as this video gets 100 likes, I will be dropping a breakdown video for the co-main event of this week's card between Deiveson Figueiredo and Brandon Moreno. So if you want that breakdown video, please hit the like button below. I would really appreciate it. And don't forget to come back to this channel every single day of the week, where I'll be dropping a new breakdown video every day this week for another one of the fights at UFC 283. If you like these breakdown videos, you want more of them, head on over to my website, MMABettingTips.com. There's a link for that in the description below. On my website, you'll find breakdown videos right now for every single fight on this card and every other UFC card. And also want to let you guys know that we've got a rare opportunity for you to join my live betting group. For most of the year, my live betting group is sold out because I have to cap the number of people in it, because the more people that try to bet the same thing at the same time, the faster in live betting the odds decline and become suspended. But there are a few spaces available at the moment, and they probably won't last very long. When they're gone, they're gone. So if you'd like to join, you can see this fantastic profitability chart here. Live betting is where I make my living. I do very, very well live betting UFC. If you'd like to join the group, come see what it's like. All you need to do, head on over to my website. Again, link in the description below. And you can sign up by scrolling all the way down to in-play membership. Click in here and off you go. But for now, it's time for me to explain the reasons why I feel Jamahal Hill is a very good bet this weekend. And remember what I said earlier in the breakdown. You cannot take betting non-Brazilians against Brazilians lightly on this card, because we know home advantage is absolutely huge on these Brazilian cards. So for me to heavily favour Jamahal Hill in this matchup means a lot, because I know I'm betting against that strong trend that more often than not Brazilians will win against non-Brazilians on these Brazilian cards. But fundamentally, the reason why I feel Jamahal Hill is a very good bet this weekend starts, as ever, with the odds. We've got to let the odds do the work for us. And if we check out the odds on this fight, we can see that both these guys are pretty much in the even money odds range. At the moment, the average odds available on Jamahal Hill, if we bring up the implied probability calculator, it's going to be 1.80, which is going to be minus 125 for an implied probability of 56%. If we take a look at the odds on his opponent, Glover Teixeira, we can see that he is around an average of, say, 2.0, which is going to be plus 100 for an implied probability of 50%. So the fight's very, very close to 50-50 in the eyes of the bookies. Now, what's interesting about this matchup is, in my opinion, based on my research, I've spent a lot of time researching this matchup, I feel that Jamahal Hill has an overwhelming number of advantages going into this fight. And therefore, it doesn't really make sense how both these guys are in the even money odds range. If I were capping this fight, I would have Jamahal Hill much closer to around a 1.40 minus 250 favourite, which would carry an implied probability of approximately 70%. So for me, there's a lot of value on Jamahal Hill going into this fight this weekend. But But when I say that Jamahal Hill is a great bet for all the reasons we're going to get into, that doesn't mean that you should go and bet your house, bet your bet your sister, your mum, your dad. It doesn't mean you should sell all your worldly possessions and bet it on Jamahal Hill. All it means is that the odds give you a really good risk to reward ratio. There's a lot of things that Glover can do in this fight to cause Jamahal Hill big problems. So if you watch my content, you know that I'm not one of these guys that is just going to say, Jamahal Hill's going to smoke Glover this weekend. I'm so confident in him. He's definitely going to win. Glover's a bum, blah, 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 all this stuff. You hear these people talk super confidently and feel super confident in their bets. You're not going to get that here. All I'm saying is Jamahal Hill gives you a very good risk to reward ratio this weekend. I think there's a lot of value in his odds. So if you are going to be betting this fight this weekend, I would urge you to do your own research. Take a look at this fight yourself. And remember, I'm just a guy on the internet sharing his opinion. Before pulling the trigger on a bet this weekend, you want to do your own research, but I would be taking a look at Jamahal Hill if I were you. So let's get into the reasons why I think Jamahal Hill is a good bet. First of all, we can start with the X factors on this matchup. So Jamahal Hill's 31 years old, Glover Teixeira is 43 years old, which means there's a 12-year age gap on this fight. We know that the younger fighter wins around 70% of the time, 7-0, when there's a 12-year age gap in a fight. So straight away, if you were to just purely blind bet that statistic, knowing that the implied probability on Jamahal Hill's odds is 56%, knowing that the younger fighter wins around 70% of the time when there's a 12-year age gap in a fight, gives you a really nice margin over where the current implied probability on Hill's odds are. But of course, it would be very foolish to blind bet anything in sports. There are a whole lot of other reasons why I think Jamahal Hill is a good bet this weekend. If you look at the career trajectory that both guys are on, we know that Jamahal Hill, being at the stage of his career he's at, he's only had 12 pro fights. He's very young. He's going to be making big improvements from fight to fight. If you look at Glover's last performance against Jiri, for me, it was the first major signs of declining Glover. He got tired in that fight. He looked quite sloppy. He made a lot of mistakes on the ground against Jiri that he wouldn't usually make. And at 43 years old, we know Father Time's undefeated, and Glover is going to be declining from fight to fight. It's unlikely he's going to look better against Jamahal Hill than he did against Jiri. Now, of course, home advantage is big. He might feed off the energy of the Brazilian fans, may start really strong, may look great early, but it's very difficult to visualize a realistic situation in which a 43-year-old Glover is going to be able to outwork and outlast a young, hungry bull like Hill over a 25-minute MMA contest. If you go back and watch Glover's fight against Jiri, he was very sloppy. Like you say, he got tired pretty bad around about the third round, which is uncharacteristic for Glover, which I feel is a clear sign that he's on a steep decline. And he'll be 44 years old in October. In 10 months' time, he's going to be 44 years old. This is a young man's game. This gives Jamahal Hill a big advantage going into this fight. If we look at their size, Jamahal Hill is 6'4" with a 79-inch reach. Glover 6'2" with a 76-inch reach. So a bit of a height, bit of a reach advantage for Hill here. But what's very significant about the size of these two is how well Jamahal Hill uses his frame, how well he uses his length and his wingspan to chip away at his opponents from a safe distance. It's very difficult to get inside on Jamahal Hill because of how technical he is, how well he moves, how fast he is, and how good he is at reading his opponents. And we'll get into that more in just a bit. Now, when we talk about how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, it's quite clear to everyone that this is a classic striker versus grappler matchup. Jamahal Hill should have a big advantage on the feet, and if the fight goes to the ground, that's an area where you'd expect Glover to have a big advantage. So the main focus of this breakdown video is going to be trying to work out whether or not Glover's going to be able to get this fight to the ground and keep the fight on the ground to do enough to win the fight, right? Either by holding Hill down and beating him up or submitting him and getting a stoppage. That's really what we're going to be focusing on here. Because if we think about how these two match up when it comes to striking, what Hill is very good at doing is applying a ton of pressure to his opponents from a safe distance. Pressure fighting is a very difficult style to deal with. When we think of all the guys who are very good pressure fighters, right? Guys like Nate Diaz, guys like Tony Ferguson, guys like Sean Strickland that we were talking about last week. These guys put themselves in the firing line to continually come forward, force their opponents to fight in an uncomfortable range, and just apply constant, relentless pressure to them to break them down and wear them down. They use their superior cardio to just out-hustle you and outwork you and cause you to fight in a constant state of discomfort. Jamahal Hill does the exact same thing, but the difference with Jamahal Hill is that he doesn't have to put himself in anywhere near as much danger as those kind of pressure fighters, because Jamahal Hill does a really good job of using his length to stay just outside of a range where he can be hit. So he's very good at coming forward, forcing you to fight on the back foot, forcing you to fight on the outside, and crowding you and peppering you with a really diverse range of attacks. But because he's very good at reading you, because he's very fast, because he's got great footwork, and because he's got a long wingspan, he knows how to use that length, he could just chip away at you and pepper you, and every time you come forward to attack him to try and alleviate that pressure, he sees you coming from a mile away, and he can just back up outside of a range where you can get to him. And then as soon as you stop attacking him, he's right back on top of you, pressuring you, forcing you to fight back in that uncomfortable range. Very, very difficult to deal with someone like Jamahal Hill because he just overwhelms you. And this gives him a huge edge on the feet against Glover, because Glover is not as fast as he used to be. He cannot take a shot like he used to. Doesn't really have much power in his hands. I mean, Glover was never really a devastating knockout artist. Even in his prime, he would kind of out-hustle you and outwork you with dirty boxing. He would just grind you down with pressure himself, actually. But he was never a fast, power puncher. When you look at Glover as well, you could also see a big area of decline in him are his reflexes. Just not as sharp as he used to be, doesn't see the shots come in like he used to, so he can be caught cold. And it's one of the reasons why we do frequently see Glover get rocked, dropped, and wobbled in his fights these days. It's just because he's not as sharp as he used to be, and the punches that knock you out, the ones that really hurt you, are the ones you don't see coming. Glover's just not as sharp as he used to be, and as a result, it's going to be very difficult for him to survive on the feet with Jamahal Hill. And because he doesn't have that speed and that power to back Hill up and get respect in there, it's going to be very, very difficult for him to stop Hill from just coming forward and just totally lighting him up. That's what makes the fight between Jamahal Hill and Glover different from the fight between Jamahal Hill and Thiago Santos. Because even though Thiago Santos, is also quite old, he's also declining, he's definitely not as sharp as he used to be. Thiago Santos still has a lot of power in his hands, and he is a fast, dynamic, athletic, powerful striker. So Hill had to show him a lot of respect. Hill couldn't be as aggressive with someone like Thiago Santos as he could be with someone like Glover, because Santos can cover distance so much quicker and land devastating counters that can land with knockout impact so much faster. There's far more risk for Hill to pressure Thiago Santos than there will be for Hill to pressure Glover. Hill's going to be able to chip away at Glover and use his length with far less, nasty repercussions than if he were to be really aggressive doing that to Thiago Santos. So Hill had to fight much more cautiously against Thiago Santos in his last matchup than he usually would. So on the feet, Hill is going to have an enormous advantage. He should light Glover up bad. I think most likely outcome here is Hill winning by knockout. And the Thiago Santos fight helps us segue nicely into how these two match up when it comes to grappling, because we've already said it's a classic striker versus grappler matchup, and the probability of Hill winning this really depends on how well he can deal with the threat of Glover's grappling. And we know, based on Jamahal Hill's last fight against Thiago Santos, that Hill's biggest weakness is his takedown offense and ground game. Thiago Santos is not a very good wrestler. He's not a very good MMA grappler, and he does not have a very good ground game. We know that Glover, even at this stage in his career, is levels and levels and levels above Thiago Santos on the ground. And we saw Thiago Santos have a reasonably good amount of success against Jamahal Hill on the ground at times. But it is important to remember the styles make fights. And just because Thiago Santos was able to cause Hill problems on the ground doesn't mean Glover will. Even though Glover's a better grappler, there were things that Thiago Santos could do which, in my opinion, increased the probability that Santos was able to get the fight to the ground over what Glover's bringing to the table. What I mean by that is, we've already said that Santos is a fast, explosive, dynamic striker with legit knockout power in every single thing that he throws. And as a result, Hill had to fight very cautiously against him. But what Santos' striking enabled him to do in that fight was close the distance on Hill. He was able to get close enough to Hill to grab a hold of him and take him down. Because every time Thiago Santos would blitz forward and attack Hill, Hill wouldn't know if a head kick was coming, a big power hook was coming, or a takedown attempt was coming. That meant Thiago Santos had the element of surprise on his hands, and as a result, he was quite often able to get close enough to Hill to tie him up and take him down. Now, I'm not trying to say that Ovin St. Preux is anywhere near the level of Glover Teixeira or Thiago Santos. That's not what I'm saying. However, Ovin St. Preux isn't the same kind of dynamic striker that Thiago Santos is. He's very much a single shot power striker that will load up on a big singular head kick or a big singular power left hook. He's not going to throw a lot of volume. He's not going to throw combinations. And as a result, for a guy like Jamahal Hill that is exceptionally good at reading his opponents, Hill can spot subtle changes in body language when someone like OSP is going to throw a strike very, very easily and get out the way. Therefore, in the Jamahal Hill OSP fight, every time you saw OSP, try and level change, potentially threaten a takedown, he got absolutely nowhere near it, because what he was doing was so predictable for Hill, because OSP didn't have the striking to set that entry up. And I see Glover facing the same problem as what OSP did, because when you look at Glover on the feet, he's so flat-footed, he's so stiff, he's so rigid, he's so slow. At 43 years old, he just doesn't move very well anymore. So when he comes forward, when he goes to level change and come forward and attack Hill is going to see that level change coming from a mile away. And what I've noticed about Hill is that he doesn't hang around in a range where you can grab a hold of him for long enough for you to do anything to him. So what I mean by that is, if he's facing a grappler and he knows that you want to try and take him down, and there ain't a whole lot of threat for him, from his opponent's hands, as soon as they come forward, as soon as they change levels, as soon as they change their body language just a little bit, Hill immediately backs up, clears his legs, and uses his length, uses his hands to keep them at arm's length, which makes it extremely difficult for them to get in deep enough on his legs and hips to complete a takedown. Because as soon as they go to shoot that single leg, as soon as they go to shoot that double leg, he's already well in the process of defending the takedown. He's already in a different postcode, backing up, circling away, pushing down on their head to make it even more difficult, like I say, for him to get in on the legs and hips of him. Now, occasionally, in the case of Thiago Santos in particular, someone will either, be able to set up a takedown attempt with their strikes, or perhaps Hill won't read them for whatever reason, because he's tired or just, doesn't read them, he makes a mistake. And they will actually be able to get close enough to him to tie him up and start to drive through on the takedown. But because Hill is so athletic, because he's got such good balance, he's very, very good at backing up and getting his back to the cage, where he can then use the cage as a tool to defend a takedown. And from there, using his length, he can create that nice wide base against the cage. He's very good at fighting for underhooks, very, very good at using the cage as a tool to defend a takedown. And if you do get him down, he's very, very good at using the cage to wall walk back up to his feet. Jamahal Hill is extremely difficult to hold down. He's one of these guys that as soon as you take him down, he's very, very good at quickly scrambling back up to his feet. And because his cardio is so good, it's also extremely difficult to wear him down with grappling. So for a guy like Glover, this becomes a really difficult stylistic matchup because while he does have a huge advantage on the ground over Jamahal Hill, his opportunities to get this fight to the ground are going to be very slim because it's not easy to get in deep enough on the legs and hips of Hill to take him down. If you do take him down, it's very difficult to hold him down because of how good he is at popping back up to his feet. And another problem for Glover is that Hill's not the kind of guy that Glover is going to be able to wear down with his pressure. You know, we've seen guys in the past do a pretty good job in neutralizing Glover's grappling early in the fight because of how stiff and rigid he is when he shoots those initial takedowns. But Glover, with his persistence, continues to try and get the fight to the ground, continues to try and shoot takedowns and grapple, and eventually whoever he's fighting wears down and the takedowns become easier for him. I really don't see that happening for Hill. If anything, I see Glover getting more and more tired as the fight progresses, which will make it even easier for Jamahal Hill to neutralize the threat of Glover's grappling. And this is pretty much what happened in the Jiri Prohaska fight. If you go back and watch that matchup, even though, of course, Glover did take a lot of damage in that fight, which would have contributed to how bad he looked, in my opinion. But towards the end of round 2, going into round 3, and certainly in rounds 4 and 5, Glover just didn't have the energy to fully commit to takedowns anymore. So early in the fight, when Glover would shoot in on Jiri, he would drive in nice and deep on the legs and hips of Jiri. But into that second, third, fourth round, he just didn't have the energy to fully commit to the takedowns anymore, which made him more predictable, easier to neutralize, and an absolute sitting duck on the feet to Jiri's striking. Now, I know Jiri is very hyped up. A lot of people rate Jiri very highly, and so do I. But there is a big difference between Jiri's style of striking and Jamahal Hill's style of striking, which in my opinion, again, styles make fights, but in my opinion, makes Jamahal Hill a much more difficult stylistic opponent for Glover than Jiri was. Because if you look at Jiri's style of fighting, he isn't the best at fighting at distance. For the most part, Jiri's style of striking is blitzing based. He will bum rush you, he will overwhelm you, with big, devastating power strikes. But if you stood in the middle of the octagon with him in kickboxing range, he's not the best at landing from kickboxing range. Jiri is a guy that likes to be all the way out to a range where he can be hit, or all the way on the inside, blitzing forward, overwhelming you, trying to knock you out. And because of this style, when Jiri is blitzing forward, eventually he's going to run into you. And as a result, there were many times throughout the Glover versus Jiri fight where both guys got close enough to one another for Glover to start working for a takedown, just because the nature of Jiri's striking means that he's always running into people. What's different about Jamahal Hill is, like we already said when we were breaking down the striking, he does an absolutely phenomenal job of chipping away at you from distance but from a safe range. He uses his length just to pepper you and pick you apart, and as soon as you start to come forward a little bit, very good at reading you and getting out the way. Something Hill does which Jiri doesn't, which again will make it much more difficult for Glover to get close enough to Hill to grab a hold of him and take him down. Now, based on everything that I've just said, I think this is a fantastic stylistic matchup for Jamahal Hill. I think he wins a very good percentage of the time. But this is MMA. It is a cage fight to the death. It is a chaotic sport, and we know anything can happen. So again, don't sell your mum, don't sell your dad, don't sell your house, and don't bet everything you own on Jamahal Hill. I'm not saying I am super confident on Hill this weekend. You can't, because ultimately Glover is very experienced. He's got home advantage on his side. This is the biggest fight of Jamahal Hill's life. Perhaps he'll suffer from performance anxiety and underperforms. Or perhaps Glover just takes him down, catches him in a bad position early and submits him, right? All these things can happen. But when you look at how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, when you look at Jamahal Hill's size and age and current career trajectory versus Glover, for me, he has a massive amount of advantages going into this fight. For me, the odds are overwhelmingly stacked in Hill's favour. And for me, there is a great deal of value available on Jamahal Hill this weekend. I really do feel he is a steal at these odds in the even money odds range, and it has been a while since I've seen a bet in the UFC which has as much value as this. But value doesn't pay the bills. Value does not guarantee a win. All it means is you're getting a good deal for your money, in my opinion, if you bet Jamahal Hill this weekend. Of course, it's all for entertainment purposes. I'm just a guy rambling on the interwebs, but I do have a lot of experience at betting MMA. I make a living live betting MMA. Been doing this a very long time. So, do your own research. But if I were you, take a really close look at Hill this weekend, because I think he wins this a really good percentage of the time based on what I'm seeing. So now let's take a look at the over-under on this fight and also the prop bets to see if we can dig up anything interesting there. So I personally feel it's very, very, very likely that this fight ends inside the distance, just because whenever you've got two guys with extreme advantages in the area that the other is weak, it's difficult for... You don't see the fight go the distance that often in that type of situation, because ultimately one guy is going to be taken very much out of their comfort zone, and if they struggle to defend themselves in the area that they're weak, it's very difficult to see them lasting a really long time in the fight, right? This is 5 rounds, 25 minutes. If the fight were to stay standing, with how vulnerable Glover is on the feet and how dangerous Hill is, difficult to see Glover surviving. By the same token, if Hill completely falls apart and Glover has a lot of success with his grappling, tough to see a guy like Hill, who's very green on the ground, being able to survive 25 minutes on the ground with Glover. I know that's an oversimplification of how the fight could go, but you guys get what I'm trying to say. So in terms of the over-under, the odds on the fight not to go to a decision are absolutely dead. You cannot bet that. 1.19 in that minus 500 range, pointless. So to be honest, the over-unders are a little bit dead to me here. If you really, really, really want to bet the over-unders this weekend, and I won't be, but if you really do for action, the one that I would probably take is the over 1.5 rounds. Just because Glover's a tough fucker. Jamahal Hill, in an effort to pace himself in a long 25-minute fight, in the biggest fight of his life, may start a little bit slower and, look to pace himself rather than coming out the gate super hard and looking to kill Glover early. And so I think the over is probably the best over-under bet on this card. But I don't think it's a particularly strong position because, like I say, if Hill does come out the gate aggressive and turn, Glover into a panic wrestler early, I could literally just see Hill absolutely starching Glover and getting a quick knockout here. So I don't like the over-unders on this one. In terms of the prop bets, obviously the one that jumps out at me straight away would be Jamahal Hill to win by knockout or TKO. But I think the odds are absolutely terrible. If we look at the odds on Jamahal Hill to win by knockout or TKO, average odds are around 2.15, which is plus 115. I mean, the implied probability on those odds is 47%. The implied probability on Jamahal Hill to win straight, 56%. For me, you may as well just bet more money on Jamahal Hill straight than to take that prop. In terms of other props, there's nothing else that really interests me too much. The odds on Glover by submission are very steep. We know Jamahal Hill is a very tough guy, so even if Glover were to trap him in a bad position on the ground and look to get a finish through ground and pound, probably not likely that he gets Hill out of there. So props a little bit dead on this one for me. I hope you found that breakdown useful. That is it for this one. And I do think Jamahal Hill, very good bet this weekend. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Will you be betting this fight? Let me know about some of the stuff I've said, right? Do you think I've missed anything out? Do you think I'm overconfident on Hill? Do you think I'm overlooking Glover? Let me know in the comments below what you think. Like this video if you like it. And then as soon as this video gets 100 likes, I'll drop the Brandon Moreno, Davison Figueiredo breakdown video. Don't forget, I'll be dropping a new breakdown video for this card every single day this week on YouTube, so come back for that. Subscribe if you haven't already. Check out my website, MMABettingTips.com, and I'll see you all tomorrow, same time, same place, with another breakdown video for UFC 283. Nice one, guys. Thank you very much for watching. Have a great day.